Welcome to Intuitive Transformations with your host, Sylvia Henderson, and discover tools, wisdom, and inspiration that will empower you to transform your life. Sylvia is an intuitive life coach and energy healer with a growing practice that is focused on empowering others to be more of who they want to be. For the next hour, join Sylvia and explore and unravel anything in the way of you creating the life that you would love to live on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Well, hello and welcome to the Intuitive Transformations Radio Show, where you will find tools that you can use to change and transform your life every Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on the OMTimes Radio Network, the voice of consciousness at OMTimes.com. This is Sylvia Henderson, your host, and if you would like to learn more about me and the work that I do, please feel free to visit my website at intuitivetransformations.net, that's transformations with an S.net, and download my free 20-minute healing audio called Healing Fear During Uncertain Times when you join my email group. This audio download supports you in releasing fear, worry, and anxiety, especially during times of change and uncertainty. From my website, you can also register for my next Energy Alchemy 60-minute group healing call that's scheduled for Sunday, April 9th. For the month of April, we will release the obstacles that block us from stepping into our power and remembering how to transform our reality. You can learn more about Energy Alchemy when you visit my website at intuitivetransformations.net. Today is Thursday, March 30th, 2017, and I don't know about you, but something is definitely going on energetically on the planet this week. For me, it feels like the early impact from Mercury's upcoming retrograde, even though the retrograde doesn't officially begin until April 9th. And the only reason I say that is just yesterday, I had 5 different technological devices that I own, including my Prius, go haywire all at around the same time. It was a little overwhelming, and then just emotionally, it's been a rocky last few days. So, whatever it is, the energy has definitely been a bit more intense than normal, because I've noticed that a few of my healer friends and other highly sensitive souls are also feeling this recent swirl of energy. So I just want to encourage you to hang on tight. If you've been a bit more emotional than normal, this too shall pass, as it always does. And the good thing is that when emotions do come up, they're coming up for forgiveness, for healing, and for release. And the more you forgive, heal, and release these old, stagnant emotional energy pockets that you've been holding on to for a while, the better you feel and the better your life becomes. So in the end, it's really a very positive process, although not always so much fun as we journey through the process. So just remember one word as you're going through this: compassion. Compassion, compassion, compassion. Compassion for yourself and compassion for others. Well, I am very excited to share with you my guest for today, who offers fantastic information on how you can live your life with greater ease through the awareness of her divine oneness. Her name is Ellen Tad, and she is phenomenal, and I know you're going to love her. Ellen Tad is an internationally known clairvoyant counselor who has been teaching and counseling for more than 40 years now. She is widely respected for the integrity of her work, the accuracy of her perceptions and guidance, and the clarity and usefulness of her teachings. Ellen's work has been supported by the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the Marion Institute, Deepak Chopra, Child Spirit Institute, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and the Boston Center for Adult Education, among others. Her work has been written about in Newsweek magazine, and she has lectured across the United States at colleges, universities, hospitals, and community groups. Ellen Tadd's first book, Death and Letting Go, appeared on the Boston Globe bestseller list, and she is the author of the brand new book, which just released 2 days ago on the 28th, The Infinite View, A Guidebook for Life on Earth. Ellen Tadd, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's a pleasure to talk with you today.
Well, I'm excited to share your insights and guidance that you've received with my listeners, and I know they're going to really enjoy this show. As I mentioned to you in the pre-show interview, I absolutely love your book, and I did read it in one sitting because I couldn't put it down. I loved all the stories. I know, right? I mean, I read a book a week, and so I kind of tend to parcel it out over the week, but this was one I just kind of dove in because the stories you put in your book, they're very engaging, and I love the quality of the exercises that you've provided, and I really do believe that this book is going to help a lot of people, especially as we continue to experience this awakening of mass consciousness during this rocky season of change that really the whole world is going through at the same time. And so I'm just thrilled that I get to highlight and spotlight your book. And I want everyone to know that the full title of this book is The Infinite View, A Guidebook for Life on Earth. And so, Ellen, I know from reading your book that you were aware of your intuitive gifts as a young child, and that it was very confusing for you growing up. And it wasn't until when you were about 19 years of age that you began to fully understand your gifts, and they began to really then unfold for you. So can you first share with those, with our listeners, what was it like growing up, being really confused about your gifts? Because I think that this is something that, especially empaths, it's something that is a very confusing life as an empath, because you're picking up other people's energies as well as your own. And being a young child, a lot of the information that comes forth, it's kind of dismissed and pushed to the side. So I would love for you to share, what was it like for you growing up?
Well, I grew up in a family where my mother was diagnosed with MS when I was only 2. And so I was not only a sensitive, but I had the experience of having a real traumatic shock happen to our family. My father was a physicist, so I grew up in a scientifically oriented household. And in my sensitivity, I wanted to understand why. Why is it that I have a sick mother? And I also had a lot of clairvoyant experiences where I saw faces in the dark and I saw energy around people. And I would go to my father and say, I can see molecules. And my father took me to an electron microscope and showed me what molecules look like. And I knew I wasn't seeing molecules after that, and then I got scared. I thought something was probably wrong with me, just like something was wrong with my mother. So I had a lot of anxiety, and I also found that when I was in school, I was usually picking up on the feelings in the life of the teacher or the students around me, which was distracting. And because I came from an academic family and a high-achieving family, I was confused by the fact that things were more difficult for me than my brothers because I was experiencing my environment very differently. And so I was struggling with fundamental questions that I think many people ask and many young people struggle with, which is, what's life about? What's this mean? It was very hard for me just to plug into life without a deeper understanding of its meaning. And then it was the watershed event where my mother came back and talked to me after she died, 2 years after she died, to explain that she had chosen a life of difficulty to learn compassion for those who suffer. And she said, no matter how things appear on the surface, if you look deeply, you'll see there's always reasons. And then it was really like a veil was lifted, and things started happening very, very quickly. I started having experiences seeing beings from the spiritual world, and I learned that I had to meditate because I needed to start to understand how to interpret the kinds of experiences that were happening to me. But I actually got trained, kind of a 10-year intensive, from beings in the spiritual world who said they were going to teach me how to be a sensitive in an insensitive world. And they trained me, and then I went on to start classes to help train others.
You know, that almost made me tear up when you said a sensitive in an insensitive world, because I can totally relate to that. And I know that many listening can also relate to that, and just how beautiful that is that you've been commissioned really to help those who are struggling with this reality of being so sensitive in an insensitive world. So one of the first gifts and talents that became apparent after your awakening and during your tutelage was of your intuitive gifts was palm scrying, which I found really fascinating because I hadn't heard of palm scrying before. And I know we're going to be going into a break in just about a minute. But I really do want you to talk about that when we return and tell everyone what it is and how that gift unfolded for you. So we'll be back in Thank you, Ellen. We'll be back in just a moment. Please stay tuned, everyone, for more of Ellen Tad on the Intuitive Transformations radio show on OMTimes.com. We'll be back in just a moment.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness in action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
When I was little, I didn't talk for a long time. I was sensitive to lights and sounds, so I built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. Sometimes I did the same things over and over, until one day I found out I had autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Sylvia Henderson, and I have Ellen Tad with me today. And Ellen, before we went to the break, I mentioned that I would love for you to share some information about what palm scrying is.
Yes. Well, let me just give a little background. I mentioned that my mother came back and talked to me after she died. But the actual story is that I visited my brother in New York City. I was a freshman in college, and his new girlfriend at the time, when she met me, said, "Is there anyone who's dead that you'd like to speak with?" And I was somewhat shocked by her question. I didn't know if I believed in life after death, but my mother had died recently, and I said, well, if I can talk to my mother, I'd certainly like to. And so we went to her apartment, and she went into trance, and I saw my mother's face superimposed over hers. And it was really a remarkable transformation. I always say my mother gave me birth and my mother gave me rebirth, which is the first sentence in my book. So after that, she went to visit my brother and spent the night with him, and I was left alone in her apartment. And I felt somewhat scared because I thought, oh my goodness, there are spirits around me. I'm not alone. They know my thoughts. They know my feelings. And I couldn't sleep all night. So that night, I went to her bookshelf and I picked a book on palmistry, and I read it from cover to cover. And the next day I started looking at hands. And when I started looking at hands, I had the experience of seeing visions. I didn't try to develop it. It just happened to me. And the visions were like seeing a movie in my mind's eye. And I actually did this process of looking into people's hands, having visions, and the visions I saw were of previous incarnations. So I was able to trace people back in their past life stories through looking at their hands. And after this happened, it took about 10 years for me to actually learn the term. I learned the term, I think I was reading a book, and the term hand scrying means reading the soul through the hand. And that's essentially what I was doing, because the past lives reside in the soul.
I just love that story. When I read that, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool.
Yes, it was definitely happening.
That's awesome. So, a great deal of the information that you write about in your book is really what your guides have shared with you. And I was going to ask you to talk about your guides, but there's so many questions I have for you. I would love for you to share, though, the story about a vision that you had, which your guides then used to explain to you about oneness.
I think there are a couple of stories like that in there. Can you give me a hint?
Oh, gosh. It was something about everyone was intermingled and you saw all the different races. And
oh, yes, that story. That's toward the end of the book. And this was something that happened a number of years ago. I was in a restaurant waiting for a friend who was driving a long way to come and have lunch with me. And he was running late, and so I sat for a while by myself, and I looked out the window of the restaurant, and outside the window of the restaurant was a bench, and there were two disheveled-looking people on the bench who looked like they were having a hard time. And I started having a conversation with my guide, one of my guides, because communication to my guides and teachers is just woven through my everyday life. And I said to them, how are these people going to learn their lessons? They seem more disadvantaged than I am, and I work very hard at it, and it's still not easy. How are they going to find their way? And then I was given this very detailed vision, and it was really beautiful. And it was the vision of many different kinds of people, different ages, different races, men and women, and it was like a spiral of humanity going into the light, and there were these angelic beings heralding humanity into the light, and I was told that as any of us actualize our spiritual nature and spiritual principles, because we're one and we're all interconnected, we bring everyone along. So essentially, I was told that as I move more into the light of spiritual qualities, I will help the people on the bench because we are all interconnected.
That's just so beautiful. And I so believe that, too. I think just working on our own individual self as we raise our vibration, that has an amplified ripple-out effect on everyone else in the world. In the second chapter of your book, you tackle the questions that everyone will ask in one point of their life, and that is, who are we and why are we here? And you state in your book that it does take great courage to be born, to move from an unrestricted realm into a limited body. So why do we as souls exchange the realm of unrestricted freedom and choose, rather bravely, to be born into physical limitation? And also, is life predestined, or do we have free will?
That always is the most interesting question of all for me, destiny or choice. Mm-hmm. Well, to go back to the first question, I was given a vision many, many years ago that we were all one at one point. I mean, in a oneness. And I was shown that within this oneness of consciousness, there was an explosion of creativity, and I think scientists call it the Big Bang. And there was this explosion of creativity that took place because within this oneness, we all had a desire to express and to create. And so the explosion of creativity happened. And, people talk about evolution or they talk about creativity, and I believe in creation and evolution. I think they happen together. So originally what I was taught was that we came to the earth because it was an opportunity to create in a different kind of realm, a realm of physical senses. The spiritual world is very different than the material world. Different quality of experiences, and so this was another aspect of the creative individualization process. However, what happened was people started to forget their spiritual nature, and there's a term I use in my book called first error, that we all started out with an enlightenment, but then we had an original fear or an original confusion that caused us to lose our enlightenment. In Christianity, they call it original sin. But what I've experienced in my visions and in my communication with my guides is it's not the same for everyone. We don't all have the same brand of fear or confusion. So I call it first error. So as we evolved and became more disconnected from spiritual principles, life on the earth has become more of a school. Not just a creative opportunity, but a school. And so we come here, and I do see the reincarnation process as part of our evolutionary process for us to learn to regain connection with our deeper spiritual nature. My guides say we have two fundamental challenges that make it hard. One is past life fears and traumas that aren't yet resolved, and the other is our cultural conditioning that doesn't support our spiritual nature. And they actually say that our biggest challenge is cultural conditioning that doesn't support our spiritual nature, because when we're children, we get conditioned to perceive life and perceive ourselves in ways that really, from my vantage point, are inaccurate. And this causes a lot of confusion. So part of my hope in my book, The Infinite View, is that I will expand the conversation about who we are and what life is about.
Yeah, I love what you said here, because that conditioning that begins in childhood, it's as if you're programming the operating system on a computer. And once that's in there, it is challenging. It can be resolved and removed and released, but it does get challenging, because that child then looks at their life through the lenses of that conditioning. The discussion about the first error really goes right into my next question, because you do write about human beings being spirit, soul, and personality, and then also about first error. And you also talk about an internal first error and external first error. So could you please share your insights on what your guides have shown you about what the spirit is, the soul is, and the personality, which I think that's kind of like the conditioning part, but also the distinctions within what you call the first error, because you can have from what I read in your book, a very positive, wonderful past lives, but then an error occurs someplace in there that then creates this quote-unquote first error. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, the first error is the original imbalance in the incarnating process that's a root issue that then goes through all of the different lives until it's resolved.
So is that separation then, the sense that we're separate from God?
No, I wouldn't term it that way. I think it's a way of saying that, well, let me say it this way. So my guides defined enlightenment or mastership as the ability to actualize our spiritual nature with consistency. Mm. And consistency is really the key. I remember once a master said to me, not only do we attain, we sustain. So, most of us are moody. We have periods where we're actualizing spiritual principles and our deepest nature, and then we have periods where we lose it. So this process of learning consistency is very much what we're working on. So let me talk about the spirit, soul, and personality. It might make it easier for everyone to understand. So in psychology, we're usually taught that our personality is made up of genetic influence and the influence from our environment, nature and nurture. But what I've been taught by my guides is that the personality actually is made up of genetics, conditioning from parents, society, and education, past life influences, and then influence from the spiritual essence. They say that fulfillment is when the spiritual essence manifests at the personality level.
I'm going to stop you right there for a moment, Ellen, only because I know we're going to go back into another break. And when we return, I'm going to have you continue the conversation because this is really juicy and good about what the spirit, soul, and personality are. So we'll be back in just a moment.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hey, let me ask you something. Would you seat your 3-year-old child on a windowsill? Would you seat them beside a lit fireplace or by the deep end of a pool? One last question. Would you seat your child in a car seat that's not correct for them? Car crashes are a leading killer of children ages 1 to 13. Secure their future. Seat them in the correct car seat. For more information, visit safercar.gov/the right seat. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Ellen, would you mind continuing that that insightful description of who we are? You said that we're made up of genetics, and then also you were just saying also past life influences.
Yeah, so where I left off was that I've been taught that fulfillment is actualizing our spiritual nature at the personality level. And culturally, we're taught that fulfillment comes from getting what we want. And then if we don't get it, we feel sad or mad or hurt, and then we're victims of circumstance. But if we see fulfillment as self-actualization, then it's really a matter of how we're being that's most important. So my guides define the spirit as a spark of the God force that exists in all of us. This is a spark of the creative force of the universe. And everyone's spirit's good. There are no bad spirits. This is our essential nature, and it's the only constant in life. Everything else is evolving and changing, but our spirit is consistent. And each spirit has an individual emphasis. One may emphasize creativity, another nurturing or wisdom. Whatever our particular spiritual nature is, I call it our particular instrument in the orchestra of life. This is who we are. And the spirit is very simple. And as I said, constant. The soul, and some people use these words interchangeably, but my guides are quite clear that they're quite different. The soul is the container of the spirit. The soul allows the spirit to have individuality and animation. And the soul is very complicated. It contains all of our past life patterns, traumas, talents, and skills that have accumulated through all of the many lives we've lived. And in the soul, this is where the concept first error resides, because all of our past experiences reside in the soul. And, for example, when I die, both my spirit and soul will leave together because we maintain individuality after death. And then over the soul is the personality, our persona in the world, which, as I mentioned, is influenced by genetics, conditioning from parents, society, and education, past life influences, and then influence from the spiritual essence.
So you said that one of the things we're here to do is to learn consistency. And so this is within the experiences in our life, how we respond to it, or is there a way for us to, is that part of what undoes the first error, or is there a way to undo that first error?
Well, it's important to understand some examples of what first errors are like. For example, there's always a relationship between a person's spiritual nature and their first error. So someone may have a spiritual essence or nature with the emphasis of love. But then when other people are not being loving to them, they may find themselves feeling hurt. And so their first error is to feel unloved. And so the resolution of that is to understand, as my guides say, if everyone were enlightened, everyone would be loving. So if someone isn't treating you in a loving way, then they're in a process of learning. And so don't take it personally. Don't allow it to hurt you. So the process of healing that first error is to gain a level of objectivity where a person isn't feeling hurt by someone else's inability.
So it's about accepting and allowing without the judgment.
No, not necessarily, because that's only, well, I mean, that may be true in some circumstances, but maybe not in all circumstances. One of the concepts my guides have drilled into me is to ask the question, what is universal and what is unique? That certain resolutions are universal for all circumstances, and other resolutions are unique for the individual circumstance. And they say don't confuse the two, because there are times where people make statements and act as if they're universal when they're unique, and that causes confusion. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, you really do strongly advocate meditation. And so can you just share why meditation is so important as we continue on our spiritual journey, living with this first error and learning consistency or learning to be objective? And then how do you teach meditation that is different than the traditional model?
Well, to me, meditation is deep listening, the ability to turn off the brain chatter. And I think meditation is really important for a couple of reasons. One, it helps us get to a level of experience and clarity that goes beyond preconceived notions and goes beyond our conditioning. The way I teach meditation is interactive, and I make a point to suggest that that my approach to meditation isn't a relaxation exercise. You know, some people, I mean, I've done great meditations after a yoga class, and they're deeply restful, and yet my approach is really how to facilitate direct communication with spirit, whether that's our own inner spirit, spiritual oneness that exists in life around us, or our guides. So my approach, I illustrate it as an X. My approach to meditation is an X. The bottom part of the X is everyday thought. The point in the center is stillness. The upper part of the X is revelation and connection with the spirit within and the spirit without. So the first step in the process is to focus on something that inspires us, because inspiration is one of the ways that the crown chakra opens. And the crown chakra in the chakra system at the top of the head is the bridge from the material to the spiritual dimension. It's really important that that door to spirit be opened in order to have direct experience. And inspiration, I find, is the easiest way for the most people to open that center. So focus on something that inspires you, feel an open, airy feeling at the top of your head, and then once you have this expansive feeling through focusing on inspiration, the next step is affirmation, a positive affirmative statement. And this is a way of being able to practice holding the mind still, where if you can say one statement, it's kind of like training wheels on the way to having no thoughts at all. So the affirmation that I give my students is, I am spirit, I am infinite spirit, as a way to remind us of our deeper identity and to create a positivity. So I tell people to say, I am spirit, infinite spirit, and then pause, hold your mind still. Go back to the affirmation, I am spirit, infinite spirit, pause, hold your mind still. And gradually elongate the pauses until you can hold your mind still and use the affirmation only as you need it. And once that midpoint of the X is achieved, which is the ability to hold the mind still for a period of time, then meditation can be used in an asking and listening process. You ask a question and you listen. And in the deep listening, you're putting aside any of your preconceived notions to listen to what may be given.
So since you've already started talking about the crown chakra, you bring forth information about using the our sixth chakra, the third eye, which I thought was both unique and really powerful, where you can use that, our third eye, to make better decisions for ourselves, avoid being overwhelmed by our emotions, and to experience life from a higher vibrational reality point of view. Would you mind talking about how you integrate the use of the third eye?
Well, the third eye is the center of focus and concentration. It's the center of wisdom. It's the center of clairvoyance. And it's activated by focus and concentration alone. I first really became aware of the third eye when I was in an anxiety attack, and my guide came to me and told me to focus. I was in a grocery store, and I was told to focus, and I found it was impossible to be focused and anxious at the same time. And I really learned the value of the third eye over my own life experiences. But then there became a period where I became a chakra watcher, and I started watching people's energy centers, and I did this really for about a decade before I wrote a little book about it. And I learned through this observation process that many people focus in the gut as they move through their life. Other people rely heavily on their analytical minds. And then there are those who are focused more in the third eye or the forehead. And what I found was that when people are focused in the third eye, their auras are much bigger. There's a positivity, there's good decision making. And of course, we all flip-flop, you know. Sometimes we're focused and sometimes we're not. And so what I learned is that our analytical mind is like our computer, and it's fabulous to have a fast computer, but you don't want to ask your computer who you should marry. The intellect is not about wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to see the far-reaching impact, and the intellect is much more the accumulation of data. And if you've ever been on a debate team or watched a debate team, everybody's arguing their point with their set of facts. So the third eye is the center of wisdom. It is able to take those facts and put them into context. And it sounds so simplistic, but I've really worked with thousands and thousands of people, and I was raised by a scientist, so I thought, I wonder if this is really going to work for everyone, and it really does. So we have right now what I call a solar plexus dominant culture, where many, many people live their life focused in the gut. And my guides say this is a mistake because the solar plexus is the center of human emotion, and it's not a bad center, but it's the most misused, because too often it's used as the center of perception when it actually should be used as the center of feeling. They say the third eye is the center of perception, and the third eye should inform the solar plexus. So part of my passion is to really help people understand the power of the third eye, because my guides say it's a pivot away.
Well, it sounds like that's a big game changer for many of us, especially those of us who tend to make our decisions on a very emotionally charged basis. When we return after the break, more of Ellen Tad. You're listening to Intuitive Transformations on OMTimesRadio.com.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Did you just look down at your phone? You did it again, didn't you? You know, you're flying down the road in a 3-ton hunk of steel, and a text takes your eyes off the road for an average of 5 seconds. At 55 miles per hour, that's long enough to travel the length of a football field and cause some serious damage. Turn it off. Trust me, whatever it is, you'll live.
Learn more at StopTextStopWrecks.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
We're back, everyone. And Ellen, would you mind telling everyone how they can get in touch with you and how they can find your book, which just launched 2 days ago?
Thank you. Well, my website is ellentadd.com, and my book, The Infinite View, is sold online and in bookstores, and I hope it's available where books are sold. That's my understanding. So So I don't think it should be hard to find. I'd love to have people let me know how they feel about the book once they've read it. I look forward to getting some feedback.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I can't believe we're in the last segment of the show already, Helen. This has been phenomenal. This has been really wonderful. And I think we've covered a lot of my questions, but I still have so much I want to ask you. And maybe what we can do is have you come back on the show at a later date so we can continue this conversation. Because, like I said, I think that the information you have can really help a lot of people who are struggling in their lives and trying to understand themselves and trying to understand, how life works because it's not working for them at this time. One of the things your guides shared with you that you wrote about in your book is that the feeling of inadequacy is the number one dis-ease of humanity, really. And I have to agree. I think a vast majority of us believe that we're not good enough to experience life, or we're judging what happens as our life as evidence that we're not good enough, which is something you've already touched on a little bit earlier in the show. So when we get into this story, we tend to beat ourselves up with this not good enough story being played through our thoughts. Is it possible to change this pervasive story? And do you have any advice for those out there who are feeling very challenged right now, because it's a very painful and punishing story, especially for sensitives and for empaths?
Yes. Well, in my book, I tell the story of a friend of mine who lived at my house many years ago, and she was struggling with feelings of inadequacy, and I was trying to help her, but I wasn't very successful and clearly didn't know how. And so I asked my guides one day, what heals inadequacy, feelings of inadequacy? And I was very surprised by the answer. And the answer I was told was humility antidotes inadequacy. And I realized that, the common cultural message is that if someone's feeling bad about themselves, you build them up. You tell them how great they are. But it doesn't work. And my guides say that humility is what antidotes the feeling of inadequacy. So in my classes, I have people meditate on what is humility. And I have them say the affirmation, I am filled with humility. And what they experience when they say, I am filled with humility, is that they're one small, significant part of the whole, like one pebble on a beach of pebbles, one star in the sky. And from the feeling of humility, we can relax, we can just be ourselves, we don't have to prove ourselves, and we're enough. And I found that when my guide told me that humility was the antidote for inadequacy, it healed my inadequacy, that through immersing myself in meditation, in the affirmation of humility, it created this enormous sense of relaxation that, oh, I'm human, I'm spirit, and I'm learning. And therefore, I can relax. And what I find is when people relax, we learn better than we do when we're stressed. And so I suggest trying the experience of immersing oneself in humility. And it's also recognizing that from humility, we need each other. We're one small significant part, not one small insignificant, but one small significant part. And unfortunately, there's too much focus on competition, which is better than, less than. And that really interrupts the feeling of interconnection.
And when I hear you describe humility, to me, that feels like surrendering to Source, surrendering to the divine, knowing that I don't have to have all the answers, that there's something far greater than me that does, and that I can trust in that. Toward the end of your, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
Well, I think I think what I really want to emphasize, I mean, I agree with you, but I also have a but. And that is that too much in our culture, people focus on spirit being source outside of us.
No, it's inside.
But my guides really emphasize the sources within us. And so I and all of us have an enlightenment within us.
Absolutely.
And so when I say I'm filled with humility, I'm also acknowledging that spark of enlightenment within me. So it feels like it's so important that it be both.
And I'm glad you made that distinction, because when I say source, the source is within me. There's nothing outside of me that's not within me. So, yeah, I think we're on the same page there. So towards the end of your book, you talk about attunement. What do you mean by attunement, and how can we have a true experience of it?
So to me, and what I've been taught, is that attunement is aligning our conscious mind with our spirit, or, as you would say, source. So attunement is a wonderful way to move through life and make decisions. And the two fundamental ways that I teach attunement is deep focus, activating of the third eye, and deep listening, meditation that can be utilized when we're sitting in a lotus on the floor, or we're just listening deeply as we're moving through our day-to-day lives.
And so,
but, one thing about attunement is sometimes attunement gives us an answer that's very contrary to our cultural conditioning of what's wise to do. So sometimes the process of accessing attunement isn't easy because it can bring up fears that have to be worked through.
Exactly. Sometimes even meditation in of itself can bring up fears that we need to work through.
Yep. I totally agree.
Yeah. So saving the best for last, because I know we only have a few more minutes left in the show. You talk about perfection. And perfectionism is something that I struggled with from my early childhood well into my adult life, because I was raised in a very highly critical home. And I was raised to believe that if I could just be perfect, that I might be actually accepted and loved. And I found that not to be true. And it wasn't until I was blessed with two autistic sons that I learned over time that my drive to be perfect was actually making me ill and not allowing me to enjoy my life. So can you talk about the distinction between perfect and perfection?
Yes. Well, this is a class topic that I've taught for many years, and it's really a class that focuses on this difference, the difference between perfect and perfection. And in the class, I have my students meditate on the affirmation, I am perfect. And when they do, what they experience is they can't breathe, they can't move, they can't change, because if they're perfect, then there's no movement. And so the feeling of perfect is actually very stagnating. When I have them meditate on the affirmation, I am filled with perfection, they feel movement, they feel growth, they feel enlivened. And the way my guides explain this difference is that perfect is an arrival and perfection is a process. And that when we're in perfection, we're in the flow, in the process of evolution. And that trying to achieve perfect is really not achievable. And the other aspect of perfection that they emphasize is that perfection is the interconnection of everything. That when we say, what lesson am I to learn, then we're focused on a specific lesson that's ours. But when we say, what is the perfection of this situation, then the perfection is much more far-reaching. My learning affects the learning of others. My action affects, as my guides say, all of life. So perfection is this evolutionary process that's always interconnected. And I must say, I've never been able to grasp the concept intellectually. I have only been able to grasp it in meditation because it's so vast and it's so miraculous.
It sounds incredibly healing from an experiential point of view. It's just really what I think so many people would be relieved to step into, and to discard the illusion that being perfect is even a possibility.
Yes, it's a relief.
It is a relief, yeah. It's dropping a huge burden. So, gosh, Ellen, I know we're coming to the end of the show with just a few moments left. I want to thank you so very much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom and your guidance. I think that it's going to help many people who listen to the show. And
thank you, Sylvia. I just really appreciate having a platform and an opportunity, and I appreciate that you have your show to bring people to the public.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, everyone, the name of Ellen Tadd's book, The Infinite View, a guidebook for life on Earth, published by Tarsher Peregrine. You can find it in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, just about anywhere books are sold. I want to thank you all for listening today, and I want to just remind you to remember that you are in the process of perfection, and in that, it is perfect. So love to you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. Take care, and goodbye for now.